It's great to be with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see this presentation. And as Amanda said, we'll take questions throughout the presentation. You'll have an opportunity to unmute later on, but if you want to even type things into the chat as they occur to you so you don't forget, that's great. But before we get started, I'd like you to introduce yourself in the chat. And when you're introducing yourself, tell us who you are, what organization you're from, and if you could list one thing that you would most like to learn about the Farm Bill today, that would be great. And I'm going to ask Amanda to help me keep track of some of the things that people are interested in learning, because we want to try and answer your questions as much as we possibly can. So please go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat, your name, where you're from, and what it is you'd most like to learn about the Farm Bill. And while you're doing that, I will go ahead and get us started. This presentation is really focused on why we still need a Farm Bill. It's been almost 100 years since we started having farm bills, and the need for this legislation has not diminished at all. These are a few of the things that we're going to go ahead and cover today. Just tell you a little bit about OFA, our policy program, why we first started having federal farm bills, where we're at now and where we appear to be going. We're going to take a look at the Farm Bill makeup, the process for establishing a Farm Bill, which we're very much deep in that process right now. A little bit about spending, some solutions to some of the challenges that we face with our food and agricultural system, and then a summary with some opportunity for questions and discussion, because I love being able to hear from you what the challenges are that you're facing and what things you think are most important that need to be prioritized. So by way of introduction, if you don't know much about the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, lovingly known as OFA, OFA has been around for about 45 years. It's an organization that was really started by farmers who wanted to farm in a sustainable way, who wanted to be able to get a fair price for their products, and wanted to ensure they could provide healthy access to food access to people in their communities. So a couple things about OFA are that we are a USDA accredited organic certification agency. So we provide organic certification to farms and food businesses in 12 states across the Midwest. But we also do a tremendous amount of education and public policy work. We host the largest sustainable agriculture conference in Ohio in February every year. We have 3 sustainable agriculture educators, and we're doing a lot of work today around outreach to underserved producers as well. So our policy program has been around for about 12 years now, and we're really working to try and move towards a more healthy food system that really serves our communities. You can read what's on the screen there. I won't read it to you, but realizing some of these changes that we want to see, the kind of food system that we want, is not going to happen without public engagement. And before we get started, one of the things that's really important to understand is, I think, the Farm Bill is huge. They call it an omnibus bill because it is so big. There are 11 titles, and it is incredibly complicated. Some people like it that way. It can be intimidating, and a lot of people will not engage because it is intimidating. If we don't engage, we're accepting the status quo. But you don't have to be an expert on the Farm Bill to advocate. You know the issues that are important to you and the issues that are important to your community. And no one is more of an expert on that than you are. So please don't be intimidated about the idea of engaging in the Farm Bill. I'll talk more about it shortly, but we have a real window of opportunity in the next couple of months to make some positive change. So how did we get here? This Farm Bill legislation started in the 1930s. And it started for a few reasons, but one of the biggest reasons was the environmental crises of the Dust Bowl. It was exacerbated by the Depression and a drop in corn prices after the First World War. The first Farm Bill created programs to reduce an agricultural surplus and to raise crop prices. So that first bill focused on commodity price support and relief for farmers. But over time, these farm bills have become more expansive and include a lot of different provisions. And we'll go through all those titles here in a little bit. But there have been 18 farm bills to date. But it's really important to remember that the Dust Bowl was really formative into why we have a federal farm bill. So we're jumping from the 1930s to 2023. It's been really close to 100 years since we had those crazy dust storms that devastated a lot of the countryside, where we lost a lot of the prime soil that's necessary to grow healthy and nutritious food. On May 1st, in Montgomery County, Illinois, soil that was reduced to dust and left uncovered blew from farm fields onto Interstate Highway 55 near Springfield, creating blackout conditions. 8 people were killed and 37 people were hospitalized with this accident that involved 72 vehicles. For some, this incident was chalked up to drier weather and higher winds. After this happened, someone who was a leader in Ohio and a soil health pioneer by the name of David Brandt noted that this was a significant loss that could have been prevented with just the right education to farmers. So again, it's been almost 100 years since the Dust Bowl, and here we are, still experiencing these kinds of environmental crisis. And again, even though this is talked about in terms of drier weather and lack of cover crops, we know that climate change is disrupting weather patterns tremendously. And that is going to pose a huge challenge to agricultural production and to the sustainability of our food supply in the long term. So there's clearly more that needs to be done in the 2023 Farm Bill. And I, for one, am motivated by David to do all that we can to make those changes. So this is a time where you can go ahead and unmute yourself if you like, or type something in the chat. But what I'd really like to hear from you, I'd love you to share your number one priority for the next Farm Bill. So if you'd like to unmute and share what's really important to you and what you want to see, we'd love to hear from you. If you're not a talker, if you'd like to type it into the chat, go ahead and do that. But we're going to just make some space here to hear from you.
Amalie, I'm going down the list and allowing everybody to speak. So I think I've gotten through most of them at this point.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks everybody for being patient while we make sure you're all unmuted. So who's interested in sharing their Farm Bill priority, their number one priority with everyone?
I'll jump in. Hi, I'm Elise. I'm a graduate student at the University of New Hampshire, but originally from Ohio. I am always interested in supporting those tiny but mighty farm programs that are a little more alternative to the bigger programs, but recently have been thinking more about how those larger conservation programs could be reformed to be to better promote sustainability. So that's kind of what's on my mind right now.
Thank you for that, Elise. And you're someone who knows a little bit about farm bills. I remember that tiny but mighty was an important moniker in the 2018 Farm Bill. And you're right, those farm conservation programs don't make up a ton of Farm Bill spending, but they're really critical, especially now with some of the challenges that we're facing with farmers needed to both adapt to climate change and also help mitigate some of those changes by storing carbon in the soil. So thanks, Elise. Who else has a Farm Bill priority they'd like to share? I know some of you on here. I'm going to start calling on you pretty soon.
Hi, my name is Tessa. I'm from Ohio, and I'm a little newer to this space, but I am inheriting. I'm going to be our 8th generation farming my farm, and it's very important for me to move towards more sustainable practices. And I want to make sure that any infrastructure that would support that is represented, as I recognize many of my neighbors a couple miles down the road are in the same space I am, where we know what our grandfathers did, we know what our fathers are doing. We don't agree with all of their practices, but we also need the infrastructure to ensure we can make the best choices for our environment as well as our farm.
Excellent point, Tessa, and congratulations on keeping that farm legacy going after so long. And I think there are so many producers that are interested in moving towards greater sustainability. Even though we work with a lot of people organic, we work with people transitioning to organic. We also work with a lot of farmers who are just on that spectrum, moving towards increased sustainability. And you're bringing up a really important point. Making those changes take time, and you might not see those changes immediately. Might take 2, 3, maybe even up to 5 years to implement those sustainability practices and see the benefits. But I'd like to just share one quick thing with you. One of our partners is American Farmland Trust in Ohio. They did some what they called partial budget analysis case studies, looking at farmers who implemented good soil health practices. And for 2 of the farmers that they profiled in Ohio, they saw that over time, they saw both yield increases and increased profitability. So we need to help more farmers get there. And you're right, we need to make sure that infrastructure is in place. So please, Tessa, stay in touch and let us know specifically what kinds of infrastructure would be most helpful. Anybody else want to hop on before we move on?
I'm Jennifer Little, and I am the Family and Consumer Sciences educator in Hancock County. I'm also a registered dietitian, and I worked with WIC in previous years. I do understand the importance of those community nutrition programs and supporting them and how they help those with food security issues, as well as support the work of our farmers. We're right now partnering with our local farmers market to increase the availability of SNAP benefit usage at the farmers market and implementing the produce perks programs, which help these clients stretch their food dollars by making fresh produce available to them as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jennifer. The food nutrition incentive programs are really critical. And I'm going to go back to what Elise said earlier about these tiny but mighty programs. A lot of the FINI programs, when we talk about Farm Bill titles in a minute, that program's under miscellaneous. So, about more than 3/4 of all the spending on the Farm Bill goes to the SNAP program. But there's a ton of really mighty, powerful programs in some of these other titles and even the miscellaneous title, like those FINI programs, which are really critical in getting healthy food, increasing healthy food access to people. Tyler has stop harmful cuts to public benefits like SNAP and WIC, and I think you got a lot of support in that priority, Tyler.
Hi, my name is Amanda. I just wanted to say something that I'm looking at. So I'm the policy and engagement specialist for my organization, Groundwork Center. I'm also an urban farmer here in Detroit. And so one thing that we're talking about in the urban space is just honestly more of an emphasis on the work that urban farmers are doing in terms of climate smart agriculture and how that can continue to be supported, or even just let people be made aware that these kinds of things even happen in urban spaces and by urban farmers. So that's a priority for us, is to kind of like have more things available so that the urban farmers can continue to grow food for the localizing food systems that are here in our spaces, but also grow food in a climate smart way.
Well, thank you for being here, Amanda, and for bringing urban ag into the conversation. The 2018 Farm Bill was really the first farm bill to talk about urban agriculture in a major way, created the Urban Ag Advisory Council, and eventually finally put together some funding to support urban agriculture. We definitely need to stay tuned for opportunities to kind of build on that start in the last Farm Bill, because I think the interest and the focus on urban agriculture is only going to grow, and there's definitely a lot of need there. So thank you for bringing that one up. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move on right now, but please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat, and we'll have more time for discussion a little bit later and in this hour and a half that we have together. I just wanted to share with you some of the OFA policy priorities for this Farm Bill. OFA conducted listening sessions across the state of Ohio. We did an online survey and a couple of online listening sessions to try and hear from as many people as possible across the state before we finalized our Farm Bill platform last year. And there's 5 things that you see listed on your screen. Those are really broad, but we feel these are 5, really critical things that need to have a strong place in the next ag bill. We talked a little bit already about climate change and how that's impacting not just the growing of agriculture, but the availability of food and food supply chains. The key to really addressing this is to promote soil health and climate resilience through conservation policy in the next Farm Bill. There was a bill passed last year called the Inflation Reduction Act, which was also hugely helpful, provided a lot of funding in those farm conservation programs that was really focused on climate. So we need to keep that attention on helping farmers with the knowledge and the infrastructure they need to adopt these climate-friendly policies. We've had a lot, and we'll talk a bit more about local and regional food systems in a bit, but we want to make sure we continue on what's been a trajectory over the last 3 farm bills of really increasing the focus on establishment of these local and regional food systems, and just ramping up those efforts, making those programs work better, making sure they're accessible to people. Something that we don't talk about a lot that is critically important is the issue of consolidation and concentration in our food system. I probably should have put together a slide in this presentation. I didn't, but if you look at the major corporations that control our food system, there are very few. I mean, we look in the grocery store aisles and we're amazed by the plethora of brands. And in some ways we have an illusion of choice, but a lot of those brands are owned by a handful of corporations. And I would say that for many of us that worked on local and regional food systems during the pandemic, it really confirmed a lot of the things many of us knew and many of us feared, which was the fragility of our food system and our food supply chains. You know, we had shortages of meat, we had shortages of other products because we were really dependent on this, you know, really large consolidated system. So we really need to look at consolidation if we want to see local food systems survive and thrive. We need to also pay attention to consolidation. We also want to keep that move towards more sustainability by investing in organic and sustainable research, and critically to provide more support for beginning and BIPOC farmers. Over the past couple of farm bills, we've been talking about the rising average age of farmers. The development pressure in states like Ohio is phenomenal. If there aren't plans to ensure that that farmland is permanently protected, if there aren't plans to at least do some succession planning for that farmland so that we know it will go into the hands of a young farmer, we could lose a lot of our land base for growing food. And we could also be closing off opportunities for beginning and BIPOC farmers that want to farm. And they need a lot more help in accessing that land. So that is a critical priority. So now we're going to talk just briefly about the structure of the Farm Bill, all of the titles, some of the things that are in those titles, and the process for moving the Farm Bill forward, where we are in that process. So you can see I was wrong, not 11, there's 12 titles in the Farm Bill. The ones in red are the ones that OFA spends the most time focused on: conservation research, energy, and particularly on-farm renewable energy programs through USDA rural development, horticulture, which is another way of saying the food people eat mostly, and crop insurance, which seems like a really kind of complicated and inane topic in some ways, but it relates to the topic I was just speaking of around consolidation. You know, when farmers have difficulty accessing land, one of the reasons they have trouble getting a hold of land and being able to afford land is we've got some producers with maybe 5, 10, 20,000 acres of land. Maybe they're getting unlimited subsidies for their crop insurance programs, which makes it so that when new land comes up on the market, they can outbid anyone else for that new land, making it doubly difficult for anyone that's not already connected to a farm family to access farmland. Those are things that we need to change. I'm going to stop here a minute just to talk about some of these things. The commodity programs deal with these kind of programs called dairy margin coverage, margin program for dairy, agricultural risk coverage, and price loss coverage, which are another part of the safety net for farmers. Conservation is pretty self-explanatory, but I want to highlight just one conservation program that a lot of people may not be aware of. If you're not a farmer, you may never have heard about the Conservation Stewardship Program. This is a really critical program, and it's really the only working lands conservation program that provides support for farmers to increase the sustainability of their operations. They can implement good stewardship practices on their farm. they get paid not only to implement those practices, but to keep those practices going over time. And that's really critical for seeing some of those long-term benefits that we want to see. So if nothing else about conservation, remember the Conservation Stewardship Program. And if you're ever interested in finding out any more about these programs, please do stay in touch. The trade titles focused a lot on foreign trade, the nutrition programs, SNAP program, TFAP, temporary food assistance program, and food distribution programs on Indian reservations, some commodity supplemental food programs and the like. Credit talks about access to loans. What are the loan limits going to be? And what kind of support can USDA offer for farm ownership loans? And there's a lot of programs under rural development. Research is critical, especially in the context of climate change. You know, we need to have both seeds and livestock and animal breeds that are uniquely adapted to place, so that as we experience some of these climate fluctuations, we have the resilience to be able to adapt to and bounce back from some of these severe weather extremes. Forestry and energy are pretty self-explanatory. Horticulture includes programs like the Farmers Market Local Food Promotion Program, plant variety protection, some things around hemp. And then crop insurance, and as I mentioned before, the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program is one of many programs in that miscellaneous title. But this is what the process looks like in terms of how we get a farm bill. And this actually starts, you see up here, with House and Senate Ag committees debating, drafting bills. There's a ton that happens even before you get to that part. Most of the legislators host listening sessions in their communities. There's some kind of federally sponsored listening sessions. So there's a lot of opportunity to get input even before these bills are formulated in the ag committees in Congress. After those bills are drafted, they hopefully pass out of each chamber, make it to the floor. They debate it some more, they make amendments, they vote on that bill. And then most likely there are going to be differences between what the House passes and the Senate passes. So it goes to a conference committee where hopefully they resolve those differences in the two chambers and bring it back to the full floor for a vote before it's signed into law by the president. So where are we now? This is me trying to conjure the future of where we're going to be with the Farm Bill. You'll see in our next slide that the current Farm Bill actually expires on September 30th. What we know is that the new Farm Bill is not going to be written by then. Here we are, June 28th, and we're almost into July. You saw the chart of the process. A lot, we're really behind, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, but one of the reasons we're behind is because of the process of arguing on what the debt limit for spending should be for the country. That pushed things back quite a bit, and that's also going to have an impact on the upcoming Farm Bill. So the listening sessions are pretty much wrapping up. Some legislators are still looking for input from stakeholders, so there's definitely still an opportunity for you to have an impact. And what they're doing right now is they're really starting to develop the Farm Bill draft, which is known as the chairman's mark. The chairman of the House Agriculture Committee and the Senate Ag Committee each developed their own draft of what they want the Farm Bill to look like. You get your ideas in that draft, things are looking pretty good for you down the road. So they're working on those things now. I don't think they've even really started developing those things yet. August is a really critical period. It's known as the in-district period because most of our members of Congress are going to be in their state if they're a senator. They're going to be in their congressional districts if they're a representative. Really critical opportunity ahead of this Farm Bill to try and make a connection with your senator, with your representative, whether it's on the phone, whether it's a meeting in district or a farm tour, there's lots of opportunities there. What we're hearing, the unofficial word, is that these like drafts that I mentioned from the House and Senate Ag Committee chairman might be dropped sometime in mid-August. So we've got an opportunity before then, but even after that draft is dropped, we'll still have some opportunities. Then in September, the debate is really going to begin in earnest. Again, it's not going to be done in time. There will be more opportunities because of this enhanced timeline for you to make your voice heard. But depending on the politics, there may be a floor vote in October, and with any luck, we might see bills passed in both chambers in November and passed by the end of this year. Most of the people are predicting that we're likely to see a Farm Bill the end of this year or perhaps the beginning of next year. So I want to pause here just to see if there are any questions. Well, keep thinking about questions. Go ahead and type them into the chat. If anything's percolating there, we want to make sure to come back to those. But you all have talked about your goals, what you want to learn, and what some of your interests are. I'm going to share what we see as a few of the potential solutions. And the things that you see on your screen right now are known as marker bills. And what that really means is these are bills that have been introduced, but they're not introduced with the intention of passing. They're just introduced to gauge support and push for inclusion in the drafts released by the chairman of House and Senate Ag Committees. So there's currently a plethora of marker bills out there. OFA is tracking those marker bills. And we have, if you go to OFA's website, we've got a new section with our most recent blog post, really focused on the marker bills that we're paying most attention to, the most important ones we're tracking and supporting. This Greater Cincinnati Regional Food Policy Council is also doing a really good job with in-depth tracking of some of these marker bills, focused more on nutrition programming. And I'm sure they would be more than willing to share some of that information with anyone who's interested. But I know this is the Ohio Food Policy Network. And I know even if you're not from Ohio, probably a lot of the people on the call today are really interested in local and regional food systems development. The picture that you see on your screen right now is, of course, Senator Sherrod Brown. This is him at a Farm Bill listening session that OFA's policy program organized last August. I mentioned about how critical that month of August is to try and connect with your members of Congress. But we had him out. We brought him together at a farm, and we brought together key stakeholders to try and talk about what some of our priorities are even before this process really started. And many of you already know that Sherrod has played a key role in local and regional food systems development for many farm bills. I believe this is at least the third, if not the fourth farm bill where Sherrod Brown has championed local and regional food systems legislation. So he's really working to meet the needs of our communities. And in the last Farm Bill, those programs were under the title of LAMP, or Local Agriculture Market Program. One really key thing that happened last year, which is critically important, is that these local food programs, the Farmers Market and Local Food Program, the Regional Food Systems Partnership Program, and many other local food programs got what they call baseline funding. And what all baseline funding means is that they already have a place in the Farm Bill. They're now permanent and they have mandatory money. That mandatory money is really important because it means that we don't need to fund, or we don't need to fight for funding for local and regional food systems every single year during the annual appropriations process. We got $50 million per year of baseline funding. So it's really quite an achievement that local food is now a permanent part of all federal farm bills going forward. And the goal for the marker bill that Sherrod and his staffers have introduced with this farm bill is really to try and make our local food programs more user-friendly, try to cut some of the bureaucratic red tape, and even to reduce some of the federal match requirements so that these programs are more accessible to smaller organizations with limited resources. I've talked quite a bit about climate and soil health and sustainability. The Agricultural Resilience Act is really a key comprehensive plan for the role agriculture plays in the equation and in the crisis of climate change. This is a really big bill, and it sets a national goal for agriculture to achieve net zero emissions by 2040. That's a very ambitious goal, but there are estimates from the International Panel on Climate Change that agriculture alone is responsible for between 8 and 10% of carbon emissions leading to climate change. But according to the World Bank, if you factor in agriculture and food systems more holistically, you're talking about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from the food and agricultural sector. We can do better than that. The Agricultural Resilience Act is a roadmap for doing better. And again, it's not just about carbon. Nitrous oxide is a very potent greenhouse gas that's used in a lot of synthetic inputs in agriculture. Some of these things hang around a long time and are quite damaging. But the Agricultural Resilience Act focuses on research. It would increase funding for USDA's regional climate hubs. It invests in that public breed and cultivar research that I mentioned previously, and authorizes USDA to offer performance-based crop insurance for discounts for practices that can be demonstrated to reduce risk and improve soil health. There's some pieces here that focus on farmland viability and local food systems, on-farm renewable energy, and importantly, food loss and waste, which is also a huge generator of harmful methane gas emissions. What's likely going to happen with this Agricultural Resilience Act, and I'll talk about this in just a minute, is this in and of itself is going to be broken up into some smaller marker bills. And we have a lot of champions in Ohio. We should be really proud about that. Just briefly, there's a focus when we talk about sustainability. I'll mention organic quite a bit because organic agriculture is very much what we would call a systems approach. It's not focused on one or two practices. but it's focused on a holistic suite of synergistic practices to maximize the ecological benefit on farm, like supporting beneficial insects to deal with pests, using diverse and complex cover crops and crop rotation systems. So it's a really key part of the solution to climate change. This Opportunities in Organic Act would help provide, help offset the costs to becoming certified organic farmer or food business, and support nonprofits' capacity to support farmers and socially disadvantaged producers. And it would also go a long way when it comes to providing the technical assistance that farmers need. I mentioned that the Agricultural Resilience Act is already being broken up into smaller bills. This is one that I thought you might be interested in. The Compost Act is the Cultivating Organic Matter through the Promotion of Sustainable Techniques, or Compost Act. Composting is one of the most environmentally friendly means of disposing of food waste and other types of organic waste as well. So not only does it emit less greenhouse gases compared to other types of disposal, it also yields the valuable soil additive that enhances soil health, which in turn makes soil a better absorber of carbon and making the land more resilient to climate change fueled disasters like wildfires and floods. So finally, while there's growing interest by individuals and businesses across the country to compost food scraps and compostable packaging, there just isn't enough composting infrastructure in the United States to meet the demand we have right now. This bill would add composting as a conservation practice for the U.S. Department of Agriculture conservation programs. So it would qualify as a conservation practice among many National Resource Conservation Service programs, NRCS. And it would also create a new USDA loan and grant program for composting, and the kind of infrastructure, both large scale composting, as well as farm, home, and community-based projects. So that's another example of how this big marker bill of the Ag Resilience Act is being broken into smaller pieces, and a really important piece when it comes to community health. So this is cut off a little bit, but this is actually how this graphic is supposed to be, believe it or not. This is the Reform Corrupt Checkoff program. And U.S. Senators Cory Booker and Mike Lee led a bipartisan effort to reform agricultural checkoff programs, joined by Senators Elizabeth Warren, Rand Paul, and Kirsten Gillibrand, which again, this is a pretty diverse group of legislators. They're supporting this bill called the Opportunities for Fairness in Farming Act. What is this? Why is it important? What does it have to do with local and regional food systems? So the checkoff programs are a program that, farmers who produce commodities like milk and beef and soybeans and corn and other types of commodities, it's a mandatory program. They get a percentage of their sales is taken off the top and goes into these checkoff programs. These checkoff programs really support commodity production and have been rife with corruption, abuse, and lack of transparency over the years. The Opportunities for Fairness in Farming Act would make these checkoff programs more responsive to the farmers who are required to contribute to them. So those fees are assessed on a per unit basis, and they fund boards that promote the commodities as a whole. Sometimes those funds have been co-opted against the interests of some or even a majority of the farmers who contribute funding into that program. Countless farmers, ranchers, and other producers have seen their checkoff dollars squandered or used against their interests. So this bill is going to prohibit wasteful, anti-competitive, and disruptive behavior by checkoff boards. That also falls under that kind of consolidation bucket that needs to be addressed. And this one is really important. I think it's really positive that there's a growing awareness among the general public about the level of discrimination that has taken place. And certainly it's been a real problem within the USDA for decades. The Justice for Black Farmers Act will work to end discrimination within the USDA agency. It would create an independent civil rights oversight board and an equity commission, and reform the USDA Office of Civil Rights. It would work to protect Black farmers from land loss and increase funding for heirs property relending program at USDA. And if you're not familiar with heirs property, it's really difficult for some farmers to find clear title to their land because of the way that land has been handled from generation to generation. So that's a really, really important piece. Sorry for that, almost moved on too quickly. And it would protect remaining Black farmers from land loss. That's really a critical point. One of the things that I think is really important to bring up about this issue is one of the major goals is to forgive some of the USDA debt for Black farmers who filed claims with the Pigford litigation. The Pigford lawsuit really was a successful lawsuit against USDA, proving the discrimination that Black farmers have faced. These are a group of farmers in the South predominantly, but it's really important when we think about forgiving farmer loan issues that we design that legislation in a way where it's not taxable. That was a problem that they just recently found with the Inflation Reduction Act, offered some some loan forgiveness, but they didn't make sure it wasn't taxable, which put some of these farmers in the really bad position of now trying to figure out how they're going to pay taxes on what's considered income in the form of loan forgiveness. There's a lot more to this legislation. It would restore the land base lost by Black farmers and create an equitable land access service within USDA to acquire farmland and provide land grants of up to 160 acres to existing and aspiring Black farmers. It would create a farm conservation corps and a program for young adults from socially disadvantaged communities, so they could get the skills that they need to have viable careers in farming and ranching. Also provide a lot of resources to historically Black colleges and universities, and do just a ton more. So this is a huge piece of legislation to try and right some of the historical wrongs that Black farmers have faced. So finally, I'm going to switch from a little bit about the structure and the process to talk about where we're at with this opportunity and how we can win on some of these issues and some of these marker bills that I've mentioned. Between now and really throughout July is a really important window to be making calls to your members of Congress. Again, if you haven't made a call to your member of Congress, it can feel maybe a little bit of an intimidating. We have resources that can help in making those calls and to provide talking points on any of these issues that you might want to advocate for. But the reality is, if you do call in, you're probably going to be leaving a message with a 20-something-year-old intern, And they're just going to pass that on to the ag staffer within the member's office. So it's really nothing to be intimidated by, and is a really great opportunity to reinforce the need for some of these programs in the upcoming Farm Bill. I know I'm a broken record about August, but August really is a key time. These folks are going to be in community. And I think, as someone who is either a resident of your state to connect with your state senator, or a member of one of these congressional districts, you are the people that they want to hear from the most. They have lobbyists going into their offices every single day, asking for their issues, and many times arguing for the status quo. But your members need to hear from you. And August is a great opportunity to try and get a meeting while they're in their district. One other piece about this is sometimes there's a lot of focus on meeting with the actual member, Senator Sherrod Brown, Representative Max Miller, whoever it is. Those kinds of things are great. Sometimes just developing a positive relationship with the district staff is really valuable. So however you can do it, if you can reach out to any of these members, to their district offices, to their staffers, and share those priorities that you shared with us in the beginning of this discussion, that will go a long way. And aside from the meetings and calls, I think, op-eds and letters to the editor are a wonderful way. If you're maybe the kind of person who's less inclined to want to set up a meeting, or is not as comfortable speaking out verbally, they pay attention. And, whether it's in your major daily or even a small regional newspaper, our members of Congress really do pay attention to those printed materials. So that's another great way. And I'm going to plug OFA's website here again. And if I was a little bit quicker and more technologically savvy, I would put those links in the chat, but I'll try to do that before we're finished today. We've got some great one-pagers about making calls, about how to write the most effective letters to the editor or opinion pieces. And we can help you with that as well, if that's something that you're interested in. So finally, in summary, it's a unique political context for the Farm Bill negotiations right now. As I mentioned earlier, Congress negotiated a debt spending deal, a ceiling that is going to constrain spending. And I'll tell you, already, some national farm groups are pushing to increase subsidies for crop insurance. Crop insurance is not means tested. Doesn't matter if you make $5,000 a year or $5 million a year, you can receive crop insurance subsidies. Some of these same people are asking for cuts in nutrition programs, which, by the way, are means tested and come with numerous requirements. There are ways that we can make some common sense reforms in areas like crop insurance so they can better serve beginning farmers and those farmers who actually grow food for people to eat, while limiting support for those with thousands of acres and millions of dollar operations. It's not a zero-sum game, as many people might lead us to believe. So, we can cultivate a farm bill that prioritizes the well-being of the land, the air, water, and people, and ensure that our citizens have access to healthy, nutrient-rich, and sustaining food. While we know that we're not going to achieve all of our vision in one farm bill alone, it is an incremental process. And if we don't continually push the envelope, the people who profit from the dominant narratives we all hear every day and the one-sided policies will continue with the status quo. So again, OFA policy has staff and resources to help you take action in the weeks and months to come. It's a critical opportunity, and we would welcome the opportunity to work with you. I'm going to close my presentation now with this quote, which I think is really critical. And for those of you who know me, this is on all my emails. We don't have a right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. The only question that we really have a right to ask is, what is the right thing to do? What does the earth require of us if we want to continue to live on it? Incredibly powerful and wise words by Wendell Berry, and I think a good guide for how we move forward. We're going to succeed on some things. We're not going to succeed on everything, but we need to advocate. So, Amanda, let's just open it up now to any questions people have or ideas or resources you all have that you think might be helpful.
Yeah, and just a reminder, I think everyone has talking permission, so feel free to unmute yourself or use the Q&A box. There were 2 questions, Amalie, in the chat that I don't know if they got addressed or not, so I just wanted to bring them back up. But one asked, how long did the process take for the last Farm Bill?
Yeah, actually the last Farm Bill 2018 was written and passed in time. And that was a somewhat divided Congress. So 2018 Farm Bill was written on time. The 2014 Farm Bill was not. So it's not unusual that they don't get things done on time. They probably aren't going to this time.
And then there was one other question that asked kind of about policies around food waste, if those were included or were they part of the Ag Resilience Act?
Yeah, good question. They are part of the Ag Resilience Act, but that I think that Compost Act would kind of tie in with the food waste issue a little bit as well. But food waste is definitely one of the core components of the Agricultural Resilience Act. And this is actually the 3rd time the Agricultural Resilience Act has been introduced. Previously, we only had 1 member of the Ohio delegation support it, and that was Congressman Tim Ryan. And Tim Ryan's not in Congress anymore. So I'm pleased to say that within the past month, Senator Sherrod Brown has signed on in support of the Agricultural Resilience Act. But as of right now, he's the only member of the Ohio delegation who has. We need to change that.
All right, did a quick scan of the chat. I think those were the only 2 questions that I found that maybe we had missed. So again, anybody who wants to unmute themselves and directly ask questions or use the Q&A box. And I guess if nothing comes in, Amalie, in the next minute or so, we can go ahead and I guess wrap up.
Well, I want to thank Maddie for putting those links in the chat for me. Thank you so much, Maddie.
Amalie, is the link that Maddie included, is that a way to kind of keep up with what OFA is currently doing in regards to the Farm Bill? Is that a landing page that kind of keeps up with the current edits or processes or ways to engage?
Yeah, I would say our Farm Bill page or our news page. We're doing our best to keep our blogs up to date. But yeah, those are good places to stay tuned for sure. And again, my email is Amalie, AMALIE @OEFFA.org. I'm always happy to interact with anybody that needs any help. And yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, since nothing else has come in through the chat box yet or the Q&A, I guess we can go ahead and wrap up. So just a reminder, this was recorded. So it usually takes me a day or 2 to get this kind of uploaded and out through the listserv, but you will be able to access that as well. And I will try to include some of those resources that were linked. And I just want to say thank you to Amalie. Amalie has done, I think, 3 or 4 virtual convenings for us now on the Farm Bill. And every time I learn something new. So thank you for sharing your expertise with the network on something that's, pretty complicated and hard to digest. So you've made it, pretty easy for us to absorb some of this. So very, very grateful for the time you've taken. And I hope everybody has a good day. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.